Hey there, we managed to get a video, albeit it's going to be sped up, to show you what goes into my process when I'm getting started. And much like food, I've got to get my tools set up ahead of time, especially a cutting board that doesn't move around. So we've got a variety of knives. I always use my trusty Santoku, and I've got my tie knives with a bunch of U and V cutters. That super small, tiny knife right there is a bird's beak knife. But the one that's even smaller than that, which is the first yellow handle tool, that's the Thai bird beak knife that I tend to work with most often. And I always work with gloves with this. It just makes my life easier for gripping. So one of the things I do after I've selected the correct fruit at the store, because I have to be very picky and choosy, now I got to figure out what part of this watermelon I'm going to keep. So you see this beautiful yellow spot? This tells me that that is where it sat, but it also tells me that this watermelon is ready for eating. It's going to be perfect. Now, I typically work with this stem section, but I know the skin is going to be thicker than normal. So I have to keep that in mind when I go ahead and get ready to start the actual carving. So this watermelon, as a good example, was slightly warped at an angle. So I know that the bottom half, which is going to include that yellow portion, I'm going to actually cut this in half because I wasn't doing a full carving setup. We were doing a fruit salad as an offering for the local American Red Cross that came in. They came to the job site that I'm at. So we wanted to offer some fruit for those that gave blood. So I'm looking at this for where the optimal cut's going to be from that top of the end to the other. I know that the melon's bottom is on an angle, so my cut has to be as straight as possible, as I'm showing here. So I'm going to grab my Santoku and make that first cut. Now the thing with cutting watermelon, they can split on you wicked fast. So this is something I've got to be careful about, because one half is going to go for dicing up for the fruit salad, and the other half, of course, I'm going to use for the actual carving. I'm keeping it simple. As far as the carving goes, we're doing a simple basic flower, just to give them something to enjoy looking at while they grab their fruit salad after giving blood. So as you can see here, it's split a little bit after the cut, but not by much. I'm not actually going to worry about that. So the one with the yellow bud, that's going to be set aside. I'll use that for the fruit salad. And then this half is going to be the actual platform I use to be able to carve that flower in. So we'll flip this over, and I'm going to set it up so I've got that stem pretty much at my direction right in front of me. Now I know this skin section is thick. It's definitely something I need to start with first. And I typically am going to look at the center of this as where am I going to begin my first cuts. So we're going to remove some of the skin first. And this can be a challenge. You figure the stem is what's coming out of that section. So that whole area is going to be thicker than normal. And it does take a couple of layers to have to be removed if you're going to see the pink flesh of a watermelon. So we try to keep it as circular as possible. I'm actually using a couple of different knives here because not everything can be done with one knife. As you can see, some of the skin here has more of a green color to it. That goes to prove how thick it can get. So now we've got this where I need it. I'm taking the length of my blade to figure out where the middle is with this little condiment cup that I'm using as my outline. So I'm lightly scoring where that circle is. And this is where I'm going to start my first cuts. It's usually a 10-degree angle in one direction. And once I've done that, I'm going to go on the opposite side. And it's kind of like creating a crevice, a little valley, because I'm going to be thinking along the lines of the old days of geometry. You know, you're thinking about the angles. You know how a square is 4 corners of 90-degree angles. So here we're doing about 10 to 20 degree cuts just to be able to get that angle that I need. Because ultimately my center, I'm going to start carving what appears to be petals of a flower that the middle has yet to bloom. So here we're making the first initial cuts, and you can see the shape of the petal taking shape here just with angling the knife in a different manner. Usually the first cut is 5 degrees. The next cut that goes behind it to remove the flesh behind is about a 20-degree cut. And I proceed to continue with this, and then I'm going to remove some of the flesh in the middle of it. That can be a little troublesome because, again, that's where the stem was located. So I'll take shaved cuts as I am right here. And again, we sped up the video because ultimately this flower will take 30 to 40 minutes, depending upon the thickness of the skin, if the flesh is still too rock hard. So I sped it up just so you could see what really does go into this, so I can get it into a reasonable length of video for you. So right away, there's some smaller intricate cuts that have to be done. Sometimes that thick stem area will have thicker layers of the white flesh. It's also called rind, but I'm still looking at it from the perspective of its flesh. So I'm doing my cuts, trying to clean up the middle, because I want this to come to fruition as what would look like the middle of the flower. And it does take a little extra time, but that's okay. I'm all right with that. And then as I go, I just make sure all the rest of the cuts are nice and clean. And then the next focus is we want to trim some of the white flesh or the rind around where we started our cuts for those petals. We're essentially, we're kind of preparing the shape of what we want to make for the petals. And we go in between the petals. So I have what appears to be 4, almost 5 petals for the middle. So I'm going to go in the middle of each petal to start the next layer. And here we're doing shaping, and we're removing the flesh from behind the actual petal cut that we've put in. And we'll take each layer out so you start to see those petals taking shape beautifully. See how the green highlights the edge of that petal? It's like my most favorite characteristic of this craft, because you see how much of the green you can leave on, and it just builds character. I absolutely love it. So again, we're repeating the process. We're actually removing some of the watermelon rind or flesh, however you decide to call it, because we want to prepare the shape of the next petal. Now, sometimes I'll have to lightly shape in the sides of the petal. It's just the way that rind and the way the skin behaves. Sometimes it doesn't take the knife very well. So I just go back in and do a light shaving of it with the knife. Now, as you can see, with the knife in my right hand, you see my pinky kind of sticking out. It's actually a great pivot point. Sometimes I have to do certain angles, and the only way to do it, you have to anchor your pinky finger or your ring finger on the base of the melon or whatever item you're working on. That way you can get the right cut, you can get the right angle to it. Plus, it's a great way to make sure that you're not straining your hand. There's a lot of physical therapy involved with this. This is so awesome. It's actually quite comical to me when I first learned. My hands were killing me. My fingers would be swollen from being in positions I never knew it was possible. But it took a while. It took some practice. And now it's at the point where my hands never hurt anymore. You would think they would where my pinkies are coming out there, and it doesn't. It's like second nature now. So right away, we've got 4 petals completed. We're just lightly cleaning up on the underside. Sometimes, you're not always going to get the right angle here, and it does happen. You may have that area of the flesh where it's a little thicker than normal. So here we are with the first layer done, and now we're going to go to the second layer. And it's still repeating the same process. We're going to remove some of the flesh from behind those petals to make the playing field a little bit bigger, because I'm deliberately making larger and larger petals as I go downward. So we're going to do the same thing. Some of the flesh gets removed because we're shaping for the next layer of petals. And I still tend to like to include the green in it when I can, but even more so, I want that gorgeous fuchsia, chartreuse, whatever color name you want to call it. I want the flesh of that watermelon to start coming out. It's breathtaking. It's beautiful. It absolutely sets this out as, oh my God, it's starting to really look like a flower. Now, one of the things I can't stress enough, if you get involved in this, always have a big workspace. I actually have a container off the view here that holds all the scraps. I usually will do a whole series of cuts, and then I'll remove my scraps and get them out of the way. I try to work as clean as I can with this, because you can get a lot of watermelon shavings all over the place. It's actually kind of funny because all of a sudden I'll feel these little pricks on my shirt, and sure enough, it's that little shaving of watermelon peel. It's like, damn, that got a little sharp there. What the hell? So as we go along, the petals are getting bigger and bigger, and I'm okay with that. There's a lot of beauty in Mother Nature. Flowers are probably one of the most versatile that you can use as a guide. Then I also like I like to do my own thing. Sometimes I'll get into geometrical designs and patterns, or I'll look for those flowers that have similar geometrical properties, like a lotus flower. Lots of triangles, lots of beveled triangles. And it certainly adds this beauty to what you're working on. So as I continue, these petals are growing bigger and bigger, but I know that I'm using this for a fruit salad, so I don't have to carve the whole piece that I have in front of me, which is half a melon. So as you can see on a side view, I'm making this petal, and then I'm removing the flesh from under that petal, so I have that three-dimensional effect with it. And sometimes it'll get the best of me underside there, in between the two petals. Sometimes it doesn't break cleanly enough, but that knife I have is awesome for removing those little tidbits so I can get it cleaned up. And as I go, I'm looking at this constantly from a safety aspect. It's never too low, never too high. I'm not afraid to have to stand up sometimes. Like here, where we have to stand this up to get a better view. And plus, I don't want to cut my pinky finger. So now we're taking a look at any other layers I can put in. Here I'm just finalizing the removal in between the petals. And I will certainly say it is a very aromatherapeutic craft. I love the smell of fresh fruit. I love the smell of fresh vegetables. It's a lot of fun for me to do this. Very meditative, and it actually became such a great form of therapy for me. If you want to know more about why I got into carving, there's another video that was posted as a tribute to the carving master that I became friends with, who I learned a lot from. That's on my YouTube channel. This will also go on my YouTube channel as well. I look at this as like for this example, I used this watermelon just to offer some fresh fruit, but I also wanted something pretty. It's just something special. We had a lot of great people who were able to donate blood to the American Red Cross. And I thought it would be really nice and really special just to offer something besides boring fruit salad. And when I went back to clean up what I brought over, I had a lot of good feedback, so I know this made a lot of people smile. That's ultimately what it's about for me. I love being able to just put a smile on someone's face. That alone just makes this whole process very special for me. And I feel that way about my cooking and my baking. The smiles I see on the faces, and I hear the oohs and ahs about when they taste it, or when I bring something like this to the table. It's a very special moment for me to know that I've passed on something so beautiful that I can share this. So it's definitely rewarding for me on so many levels. This piece was very fast for me to do, about 30-35 minutes, give or take. The only problem is I would have loved to have put a little more time in it, but it was in the middle of a business week. I think it was like 10 o'clock at night I was working on this, and I had to be up at 4 o'clock. Yeah, 4 o'clock in the morning the next day. But I figured, a simple, beautiful flower was more than enough to make it look good. See all that? Sometimes the knife doesn't really get as close as I need it to, and that's okay. And the gloves serve two purposes. One, because you gotta play it safe, you gotta do the right thing when you're playing with food. And two, I'm playing with a sharp knife. That knife, I can just tap it on my finger and I have already cut myself. So, I've got to grip what I'm working on with a set of gloves just to make sure I don't cut myself. So here we're just going in with the last layer of petals, and I'm putting in the extra cut, which is going to remove the flesh from behind. See how nice that comes out? Comes right out. If you get the angles just right, this is flawless. It just goes smooth like butter. And sometimes I'll want to go ahead and remove a little bit more, actually. Now I'm going to leave a band of the skin on the bottom, kind of like a crown. I'm actually looking at just some simple side cuts with those V cutters. This is going to be a centerpiece for the fruit salad on the tray. And it actually looks amazing, just some simple cuts. And if I were to cut any lower than that, I risk actually splitting all the hard work I did on this. So let's take a look and see what the fruit platters looked like. Check that out. Doesn't that look amazing? It definitely draws you to, oh my God, look at that setup. And the fruit was so fresh. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed.